started. So hello everybody, Craig Smith. I do a bunch of car hacking in the last couple of years. Mainly reverse engineer, mainly come from the security area. But I started a group called Open Garages, which is kind of if you're interested in anything involving cars or car manipulation, hacking, that kind of stuff, that's kind of what that group is. And that's kind of led me into doing more and more car research. This particular talk is going to be an intro talk. It's going to cover a lot of stuff. But I'm going to try and keep it mainly focused on CAN bus, and we'll touch on some of the other areas. I'm really kind of condensing a full day course into 2 hours, but there'll be a focus, and it'll be relatively easy. This is a pretty large group, so I have a actual instrument cluster here. If it's a smaller group, we'd all play on it, but I have several different ways that we can all work together to do CAN bus reversing. So don't worry, it doesn't really matter the size of the class. We'll get through it. So before I get through this, kind of like a disclaimer, to build these slides, to have images, I just stole them. I didn't sit around drawing pictures for 40-something slides. I just took them off of Google Images, and it is what it is. If it's your image, sorry. So what is car hacking? It's a bunch of different things. So we have reversing of protocols, which is one of the things we're going to be focusing on today. And what they do, and why would you do that? Performance tuning is really what's been around a lot longer. People have been modding their cars for decades, and they do pretty much all the stuff that you're hearing now that the security community is doing. They've been doing. One of the main differences is the performance tuners work in their own little circle, and they share info, but it's kind of in their own little forum groups and whatnot. They're not as open to bring up certain things. A lot of it's because they're afraid of being sued by certain aftermarket people, not really the OEMs as much as aftermarket, and there's a whole reasoning for that. And so one of the things I'm trying to get to is where people are more open with stuff. Style modifications is another thing I've seen a lot of, so adding lights if you want to just trick out your car with hydraulics, or perhaps you want the lights to work and get brighter at certain speeds. I mean, those are all types of reasons that go into it. Exploit development, that's again in my area, my category of stuff, and that's working for more on the car hacking side of things. And of course your self-service, do it yourself, fix your own cars, that area. I'm not good at that part. So don't ask me about fixing the car, I just break them. So as far as why to hack a car, this is one of the few talks that I give where I've actually had people ask me why do I do that, and it's probably fairly obvious for you guys being in the security area, why you research and find these things. I think the reason why I get this question is because most people realize that there's a safety concern with hacking a car. And there isn't really a standard for that. We don't really keep it in part of the car safety checklist when it comes to security. So for me, it's really getting awareness on that, figuring out from a security perspective where we sit, and a privacy perspective where we sit. I think a really good group is I Am the Cavalry, and I'm going to have Klaus give a quick talk on, quick intro for I Am the Cavalry stuff, if you would. Would you be willing to do that?
I would love to.
All right, cool. Here is a mic. You might want to use this.
1 minute intro. I Am the Cavalry is a group of volunteers that... Take the mic.
Yeah, the mic might be the easiest.
I can probably shout this loud enough, but
it'll be for the...
I Am the Cavalry is a group of volunteers working together because we care about making things more secure and worthy of our trust, promoting secure by design, by raising awareness with lawgivers, lawmakers, and vendors, by having researchers like Craig find and expose and fix vulnerabilities. So we're trying to avoid a cyber dystopia future where we have IPSs and AV and other known to fail technologies, as illustrated earlier by Sergey Bratus, in cars, in airplanes, in trains, and so on. And we are well represented at this point in the US, but we are few in Europe. And if you want to join, please reach out. Sorry for the sales pitch. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Klaus. Yeah, I'm also a member of the Cavalry group, and any kind of help. And what's nice about that group is it's not all technical. You don't have to be really good at hacking cards. You just have to be concerned about it. There's plenty of work that needs to be done. So when talking about attack surfaces, vehicles have a rather complex attack surface. It's, you can tell from the slide, again, which I stole. There's, we have things like wireless sensors in the TPS, which is like your tire pressure. And so that broadcasts low. There's internal stuff. A lot of times they get ranked from, how far away. So you may have like a long distance communication cellular going in is maybe higher risk than near field or, inside the vehicle. And all these tend to cover different areas of expertise too, which can make things also difficult. Knowing a certain operating system stuff isn't going to cover all the bases. Understanding certain wireless frequencies isn't going to cover all of them. So there's a lot to this. We talked about this, I think, in the other one of like the first keynote. So, with lines of code, Space Shuttle is 500,000. Boeing 777 is 3.4 million lines of code. That car there is around 27 million lines of code. A lot more code runs in a car. It's mainly because all the independent sensors that are everywhere. And this picture is a crazy picture because of the gas prices. It's just insane. Yeah, unbelievable. So there's a lot to cover. And so one of the things we're going to use today is one of my favorite drivers for doing this type of stuff. And it's specifically to Linux. If you guys have laptops here with Linux on them, there'll be some things you can do where you can play along. So socket CAN, what it does, it runs in the kernel. It's a kernel driver. And it will connect basically your CAN devices to a normal socket. So just like you'd have a normal networking socket, you can now talk to CAN the same way. Well, reasonably close to the same way. And so your typical tools, you can write things in C that would just use the socket command. Wireshark would work on the car, those kinds of things. And it really makes it a really nice, very easy way to manipulate stuff for CAN. And if you don't really want to run, say, Linux, what you can do is you can always have like a Linux gateway that connects to the car. There's a piece called socket CAN D, and it's just like a daemon that runs, and it has an interface that can talk to other platforms. But this is the one I recommend. This is a good universal open source tool. The thing we're going to also use for live demos today is the IC simulator. This is a tool I wrote to simulate basically what we have physically here, more or less. The nice thing about this tool is it will, so your instrument cluster is at the top, and so there's speed, turn signals, and there's door unlock. But you can randomize the codes it uses every time you play this. It is meant to work as a game. And so you're going to reverse engineer the CAN packets to do those things, and you can give it a flag where the next time you play it, it's using a whole different set of stuff. And you can change how difficult it is to locate them and that kind of thing. So it's a good training tool. The way it works is there's separate pieces. The game controller piece here talks to the CAN bus. The instrument cluster listens on the CAN bus. And so we'll get to that if you guys want to play. If you have Linux and you want to play along, you can go ahead and grab it from GitHub. GitHub.com/zombiecraig/ICSim. You can just search for ICSim as well. But we're going to do it live, and we can do it on projector, and it's fine. But if you want to, go ahead and grab it. The only things you're going to need for it is, if you're running like Ubuntu, you can grab the SDL2 image, and you can grab CAN utils. Those are the requirements for compiling it. So a big area of research from a security perspective tends to be the infotainment units, or IVIs, which just stands for in-vehicle infotainment. And mainly because they have all these other functionalities typically to them. So they're typically connected to CAN of some type. It could be a different bus, but that's usually CAN. There's Bluetooth, Wi-Fi. So a lot of your attack surface is going to be this guy. And with the newer ones, they're very typical to what you'd have on a regular PC. You're going to have, sometimes Intel or ARM platforms. You're going to have, I've seen like a regular Linux setup on infotainment before too, so if you're familiar with that one. Windows CE is another one. This particular unit was out of my car. This was a Honda Civic 2009, and I can't remember actually what the nav system was in that guy, but that was running a Hitachi SH4 processor, which is the same one that runs in Dreamcast. So that was a little bit different, but it was still Windows CE, and it was pretty easy to manipulate and hack. And I basically used the update method to do that. And the update method would just be the method it typically uses to get map updates, also had system DLLs in it, and a really, really simple check to make sure you didn't mess with it, which was an MD5 hash. So you just mess with it and then update the MD5 hash, store it on the same CD. So they're not terribly hard from a security perspective to manipulate. And once you're on them, what you can do. So if you have certain vulnerabilities, this is where they're going to come in at. And so what bus you're connected to will really matter. Even without taking your radio apart, if you were to get a wiring diagram for your nav system, this one's for that unit actually, you can see the number 4 pin there is K line. It's not CAN bus, but it's similar to CAN. And so you can tell right away just from looking at a wiring diagram that this may be a good target for you. Because if you exploit something on this or you get something on this system, you at the very least be able to talk to K line. And K line is, this case, maybe a low speed kind of system, probably attached to door locks and things of that nature. But I've noticed also when you're doing this type of research, don't take for granted that the bus you're on is the only thing you can do. So if there's a high-speed bus and say it does braking or acceleration, and this is, say, a low speed that's typically only connected to maybe the door unlock, if you know the protocol to send, this, I've only really seen this on CAN, like from CAN to CAN, low speed to high speed CAN. But you can send it on, like say, a high-speed signal and a low-speed signal, and because they both go into the same ECU unit, it just handles it anyway. It shouldn't be on there, but it works just fine. So you should definitely try it when doing audits. So some of the newer infotainment centers, they're starting to use guest OSs, little VMs. And this is, to know if yours has this or not, it typically doesn't have an app store. If it has like an app system, it usually is running something like this. This could be QNX, it could be a couple, I think this one came from Green River's demo, this image. Oh no, this is Genevi, Gen IVI. But like, so you may have to deal with some VM type of situations, and then again, it may depend on what's running on there as an Android-based system and what kind of requirements are there. Does it talk to, if it still has gateway messages to, say the CAN, it doesn't really matter, you're in a VM. So this is a good picture of kind of the bus architectures. So you can see in this one we have CAN, which is connected in this case to locks. You can see LIN. So LIN's over there with like heating for your seat and stuff like that. LIN's a common one too. And a LIN you don't get exposed normally to. It's typically an internal wiring system. It's very, very simple, very low speed. And then if you want high speed ones, like for multimedia infotainment type of, or not infotainment, but like your speaker system, like in this case it's MOST, but it could be other things. And so this is when you hear about different bus segments and stuff. If you're reading any kind of car security stuff, this is usually what they're talking about. You may be only on one of these bus networks. And so like for LIN, just because, say if you want to control something that's on LIN, just because it's not on your bus, again, doesn't mean you can't control it. Because typically what happens is you're going to have your main brain, your ECU, is the one that maybe controls that LIN. Maybe that's the one, sends the LIN signal down and says warm up the seats. And maybe your infotainment unit isn't on that LIN, you're on CAN. In that case, oftentimes you can tell the ECU on CAN, hey, I want my seat warmed up, and then it sends the message down LIN. It's not really a big restriction, because a lot of times that's where that button is. It's on the infotainment. So, but it is nice to know about all these different ones. Because one of the things we're going to go through today, we're going to do it simple. We're going to go through the connector that's on your car that's kind of meant to be plugged into. But later, you should really pop off the panels of your car and look into the other wires. There's better, more juicy stuff on that. So CAN bus, that's our focus for today. This is a relatively easy one. This is the one you're going to hear the most about when going to talks on car hacking and whatnot. It's not much to it. It's pretty simple. There's different speeds for your buses. There's typically a low speed, maybe a mid speed, and a high speed. And by high speed, these are, I'm talking like 500K, maybe 1M. And then low speed is like 128K maybe lower. And typically all this segregation is between these different CAN buses is based on the importance of the signal. So it's not a security segregation. It's more like, well, door locks or the current temperature inside the car isn't very important. That's on a low speed bus, but our current speed is important. That's on a high speed bus. So if you're looking for a certain signal, it's important to know, what bus it might be on. There's only a few cars that will put all their signals on one bus. Mazda. But you know, that's about it. But they're really good for training because of that. You know, it's just whatever you're looking at, you can usually find. And really all that's to it is I want to go into the wiring system here. So this is your DLC connector. It is also pulled out on this guy right here. So this guy here is typically under your steering column. So you have your steering column, it's either on the right or left side. Sometimes it's somewhere else, but that's where it's supposed to be at. If you have any kind of environmental check agency, that's what they typically plug into. And the two pins that are used are 6 and 14, and that is your CAN high and CAN low pins. Up here where you see the CAN high and CAN low, the way they're working is whenever a bit comes in, or 1 or 0, they're going to separate. They're going to separate at the same time. One goes up a volt, one goes down a volt. And that is to get rid of noise. This way if one goes up, the other one doesn't, bad packet, bad bit. So the nice thing about this is it's a twisted pair, 2-wire system. The resting state is 2.5 volts. It's a very weird state. And it only goes up 1 volt. So it's very, very easy to find. If you're looking at their car wiring system and you see 2 wires twisted together and you test it and it's averaging at 2.5 volts, that's CAN. And then inside of there, like these color things, there is the green area is the arbitration ID. Everything has an ID. They don't really have source and destination addresses. They just have an ID that's kind of like a category ID. So when a packet comes out, it's not really saying where it's going or who even sent it. It's just saying like, here's a number and maybe it represents things involving a door. And that's up to the manufacturer as to what those numbers mean. And they can vary from make, model, and even year, which is kind of a pain. And then the next piece will be, which one? I think it's the yellow on that. Yeah, the yellow is, that's your length of bytes, which is up to 8 bytes. And in this case, it's a 1-byte packet, which is the red part, and that is the 1 byte that's in it. So it's an 8-byte packet, has a length, and it has an ID. That is basically CAN in a nutshell. The other stuff is really just for control flow. So because I mentioned K-line, here's what K-line looks like. Very, very similar. It's a lower speed than CAN, but it's on different wires, usually the ones right next to it. And it has up to 7 bytes, and then it's on a little header system. So you can still sniff on these, you can still transmit on these. It's just going to be a little bit different format than CAN. Most of the tools that you're going to use are CAN though, so we're going to stick with that. And LIN, which I also mentioned, is here, and there's a nice little chart. Why did it not update? There it is. So, this is pretty much the reasoning why things get used. And so we have really low speeds here, and the cost goes up the faster we go. And so you see a lot of manufacturers using LIN simply because it's cheap to install. They could have put like the heating units on CAN, they just don't. And CAN, or LIN, I mean, is also just an 8-byte packet. It looks very similar. The way it's kind of meshed out on the network's a little bit different. And so, that's an important thing as well. So this CAN bus, being that it doesn't have a sender or a receiver, a bus, if you're familiar with networking, is very similar to a network hub. Everybody sees everybody's packets. So not having a source or a destination and everybody seeing everybody's packets makes it very, very easy to be whoever you want to be. And so from a security perspective, that's kind of what people typically manipulate. One thing you will have to compete against is that the device that's supposed to be sending that signal still is. So typically the way that works is you just want to be more chatty than that guy. Or talk directly after him would be the better way to do it. So if he says, your speed's 60 miles per hour and you want to make it 90, you can either wait for him to say 60 and immediately go, 90. And then it'll automatically update to 90. Or you can just keep yelling 90 as much as you want, and then it'll just mainly show up as 90. You'll just get one packet every so often that'll look like noise dropping it. Newer cars, you'll also see Ethernet. They're not going to look like an RJ45 jack. They'll be more like a round barrel connector. It's a weird little triangle thing there. Not sure what that is. And the Ethernet that I've seen, typically what they'll do is the CAN 8-byte packets are just wrapped up into UDP. So that's, if you're familiar with networking, that may be an easy way of doing things for you to connect to it. I find the sniffers are not as good for it, and we'll get into why in a minute. But yeah, Ethernet can also exist, and it works pretty much the same way. So To get to this stuff, we had mentioned it before, it is your DLC, your OBD connector. So it's your diagnostic connector here. That's a picture of a wrapper called ODB, Old Dirty Bastard, in case you don't know. And I have a tendency to say his acronym instead all the time. So if you hear me say ODB, it's the same thing, I just say it wrong. And so diagnostic communications are typically what if you get a phone app and you want to plug in like a little cheap dongle to the underside of your car, that's what this is going to use. And we can manipulate the exact same thing, we're just not going to use the appropriate protocol. And so this also runs on CAN. It runs a little bit differently on CAN, but it runs on CAN. And the way this one works is it queries the engine control unit. The engine control unit is this guy right here. It's kind of like the main brains of the vehicle. There's many brains inside of the vehicle, but that's the main one that connects to the engine. And it'll query it, and that will get you, it'll say like, oh, give me the current RPMs, or give me your VIN number. And so and you'll get that back. So if you get an app that's gonna watch your fuel intake and stuff like that, it's making a series of queries. The problem from a security perspective is that isn't really what the car is using. It's what it's saying it's using. So there's a real packet that says what its speed is. And there's a real packet that shows the fuel. That's what the car is actually reacting to. This is more, if you're familiar with networking, like SNMP. So this is like you make a query to it, and SNMP wraps up some data and sends it to you. It's kind of a read-only portion. You can write to it. It does have some flash capabilities, but for the most part, it's just a query system. But they're connected to the exact same two wires. The protocol is a little more complicated than CAN, but it runs on CAN. It's just a modified interpretation of CAN. Why is this not updating? Okay, so here it is. ISOTP and UDS, that's a Universal Diagnostic Service or something of that nature. And this is what the OBD communication stuff does. And so the way this works is it will go out and it'll query your ECU, and what can come back is going to be sometimes way more than 7 bytes. Because it's 7 in this case because you're using some of the bytes for this particular protocol. So you're going to chain them together, and you're going to have a bigger return. It's a little bit harder to run in Linux. I'll probably demo it. But you can see these packets in normal CAN sniffers as well. They're just going to be updating a little different. It's good to be aware that they're there. It's just a different way of interpreting the same CAN data. So here is a scan tool. Check time, make sure we're still doing good time. Oof, God, I got an hour. This is basically this guy here. You plug them into a car. You can get these at most automotive shops. They will make a series of communications over the OBD. It's primarily to troubleshoot engine codes. And so you don't really need one of these. They're kind of nice, but you can sniff off of them too, but most of these things are public, unless you have one from the manufacturer. So here's some common modes. These are the things that your app would use as well. So you say mode 1 or 2, and you could say give me the mill lamp. Mill lamp is your engine light, and then you say give me your RPMs. And these are just being your first byte and your second byte. Mode 9. And then, for those who don't know, that's the vehicle identification number. That's the thing up in your dashboard. That's also stored in the ECU. So one way to tell what kind of vehicle you have is you can just query the car's unique serial number. And that serial number has a bunch of stuff in it. So you can have what they call a VIN decoder that basically looks at it and goes, okay, well, this is this manufacturer, this is this year, etc. These scan tools will do it for you and say, this looks like, in this case, a Chevy Malibu is what those parts are from. And so it will say that. I don't know that I'm going to bother demoing it because of time. But so a DTC is a diagnostic code that gets set. And it's really just some bytes that come back. And this is what you'll see if you have a scan tool. You'll see this kind of numbering system here. And so this is how you interpret it. It's usually going to be powertrain, chassis body, or network. Network's kind of generic though. And then SAE would be like a standard one. One would be manufacturer specific. And then you have a kind of a category number. And then the next numbers are very specific to your make, model, and year. So you can see in this one how this kind of lays out. So if you want to practice it, it's P, so it's a powertrain issue, SE, standard code, in the fuel and air metering system. And the 43 in this case happens to be the O2 sensor circuit's low. To get those numbers without using a scan tool, you can either punch the number into Google sometimes, or you can go to your automotive store and look for the mechanic books. They're about maybe $20 US or something. And they'll usually have in the index section just a list of these codes, and so you can just look them up. I want to make sure where they're there. I'm going to just touch briefly on data recordings from a privacy perspective. So the ECU will record this type of stuff. It'll do some freeze frame stuff. And it does, the airbag controller records a lot more information. But it's supposed to only do for a short amount of time. But it will do things that are a little bit different, such as like it knows oftentimes the weight of the person, where their seat position is, how many people are in the car, mainly for insurance purposes. So from a privacy perspective, that's some information that you may or may not be comfortable with. But they're there if you want to know about them. I don't think I'm going to demo the DTC just for time. Maybe we'll pull the VIN off the live cam. So let's grab that. So for a VIN number, this is an ISO TP request. Let me see which screen did I have this in. I don't know where my notes are, so let's just go to. All right, so I think I gotta. So one thing with doing ISO TP stuff with Linux is it's not built into the CAN utilities or the kernel packages yet. You'll have to go and get the source code for CAN utils and then load them. See if I can find it. I would help with sudo. Of let me see. Oh, these are CAN modules. Hold on just a second. So a scan tool will also grab this for you and does it automatically, but I was going to show you how to do it on the command line. I don't know where it's at. SOTP.ko. All right, well, we won't do this one yet. So like, but it's basically just your number system. And what would happen is the packet stuff, oh, actually what it looks like from my notes, actually. It's not too hard. It shows up in ASCII. It'd be under documents. So the thing that's tricky about it is, you have to have basically two terminal windows open. So what I'm doing here, this is the command to request it on the command line, and so you're using ISO TP send, 7DF and 7E8 are kind of the, I would say ISO TP kind of uses like source and destination, if you want to think of it that way. It's still just bundled into CAN, the CAN packet stuff. So that's what those two things are there. The 09 and 02, that is your mode, and then 9 is the mode, and then 2 is the request for the VIN. And then another terminal window, you'll have a receive. And so this is just it's just the same thing. It's just going to listen for a response. And so you'll get something like this. And then you can kind of go through it. So this is like, over here is your VIN, starting at the 1. So 1G, and you can see it's more than 8 bytes. So the ISO-TP thing will kind of pull them all together and reassemble them for you. And then if you want, you can just punch this number into Google, and it will usually just show you the rest of it. But it kind of breaks down like the 1G1 is GM Chevrolet, and etc. So that's how to pull a VIN and decode it. And I've lost my spot. Where's Vin Diesel? There he is. All right, next one. Okay, shit, the 5 ain't working. They're all grayed out. That's really weird. Even start to slide, it's grayed out. It's really odd. I've never seen it all where it's decided like, ah, you're done. Maybe I'll just start it again. Yeah, I don't know. Oh, yeah, I guess you're right. It's running in another window. All right, cool. So what we'll do for CAN bus stuff, just get a look at the CAN bus packets. So what I have right now is, I might set this back up, but like I have this device right here. It's, get in front of this. So I'm using the USB to CAN. It's around, I think, 60 euros. So it's relatively cheap. It's not open source. It's from 8 devices, but it is pretty high speed for CAN. The nice thing about it is it shows up as a CAN device. Most show up as a serial device and has this extra translation to it. So this one is just raw USB. Does CAN, so you can directly talk to it. I haven't really had much problems with the serial ones either. But like comparatively, if you're going to use a $12 one from China, did I bring one? I don't know, they kind of look like a little dongle, kind of like this guy. They're using their own protocol, and they don't work directly with socket CAN. So you'd have to use like your own little sniffer for it. But this guy's a nice one. I think I have to set the tool because I disconnected it. So it really just shows up in Linux as a CAN 0 device, and then you need to set the speed. I think I made a note on it real quick. So here, it's kind of how you do it. You use the IP link, and then you set your bit rate. So this particular vehicle's CAN bus runs at 500K. So I'm just going to tell which speed to use. Hopefully that'll solve my problem. No, it's right in there. Well, then what the heck? Oh, I'm not plugged in. That's why I'm not saying anything. So you should plug your sniffer into the OBD port. Hey, look. Wow. Hacking. So, live demos. So anyway, I'm going to stop it because it's like too much scrolling. So what you're seeing here is, this is that arbitration ID, remember I was talking about? And then you have your size, 3 bytes, 8 bytes. A lot of times with most vehicles, you actually see this always be 8, and they're just padded out, either with zeros or Fs or sometimes As. And so this is the CAN. There's really not much to it as far as it's just 8 bytes. Reverse engineering, it's not too hard. But this view, as you notice, kind of sucks. And this is why you can use Wireshark. This is a good reason why you wouldn't want to, because just too much data is flowing through. And if you've ever used Wireshark, when it takes things apart, it's called, I believe, a dissector. And if you're going to write one for it, that would be fine. But because it varies for each make and model and even year, you can't write a dissector for each one of them. There's not a real good way in Wireshark to say, oh, well, now I'm on a Ford Fusion, and now I'm on a GM vehicle or whatever, and just have it change this dissector. So it doesn't work very well, and it just constantly scrolls. The way you really want to do it is group it by the arbitration ID. In this case, CAN Utils comes with CAN sniffer. There's most utilities, if you're ever working on actually reverse engineering one, they're used to reverse engineering, this is how they'll do it. And what just happened there is it groups them by ID. The byte that is read are the bytes that are changing. The reason why it disappeared is because CAN packets will run at set intervals for the most part. It's almost like a heartbeat kind of deal. Sometimes they're triggered, like a door lock is a triggered one. That one's not constantly playing. And so most sniffers, when they see the same packet happening with the same data over and over again, it just removes it from your view because you probably don't need it with reversing because it's obviously not an active packet. So in this case, one that's constantly changing is whatever ID 128 and 380 are. But this is the way, when you're reversing, you're going to want to deal with that. And we're going to go through those, actually doing it in a bit. Oops. All right, went over that. Yeah, if you want a GUI, Kayak is a not too bad one. This one uses socket CAN D. It's written in Java, runs on all platforms. And this particular screenshot I kind of like because what you can do is when you do figure out a piece of CAN, you know, this byte offset is running, in this case, GPS stuff, you can mark them. This is latitude, this is longitude. It will use OpenStreetMap. And so if you record it in a vehicle driving that has latitude and longitude going on CAN bus, you can then slap them over here and then watch it on a map or whatever. But this will also do dials, stuff like that too. If you want to simulate your dials and your instrument cluster and all that, it supports. You just have to define what byte does what, and then you can just drag them over. So that's a good utility, open source. So whenever I do hackathons, this seems to be the main method everybody's comfortable with. When I used the first utility, that was CAN dump, and that just dumped everything. One of the nice things about it is you can dump whatever it is you're doing. Say if you want to reverse engineer, I think this is door locks in this example, right? Door locks. So you basically say CAN dump, you dump it to a file, you unlock the car, you stop the dump, and then you play that dump back. If the door is unlocked, then it's in that dump. If not, then it's probably on a different bus. So if the door is unlocked, great, well, we don't know which packet. So the easiest method is to just delete half of the data and then play that half back. If it doesn't unlock, it's in the other half. And repeat, and in a short amount of time, you'll have the packet that unlocks it. And then you can play with the bytes inside it to figure out which byte it was. It's a pretty brain-dead method that works fairly well. What you're going to get a lot of times doing that method is you're going to get the Christmas tree effect on your instrument cluster. And that means that all the lights here will usually turn on and blink. And it's not a big deal. When you're doing this, I guess this would be the more destructive method. But with CAN, it's pretty resilient. Even if you really kind of mess up the car doing this, you really just turn off the car, turn it back on, it resets everything. Not a real big deal. I have seen it get a little worse on occasion. The worst case in this, you have to disconnect the battery. That's happened on just a couple occasions. One time the car actually wouldn't turn off even with the keys in my hand. That was a little scary. But again, it was just disconnecting. I mean, and the thing is, you may have to pull some fuses too, just because there's some capacitive stuff. But for the most part, this will work. The other way is if you're dealing, like in this case, that one CAN sniffer, you saw those only 2 IDs that were active because most of the parts of the car are removed. You wouldn't have to use this method. You can just eyeball it. But on a normal system, when we do the IC simulator, I'm taking real data and throwing that in there. It's a lot more packets you have to sort through. So this is a quick method. Oh, cool. Now we get through some real demos. All right. So let's do that. So now IC sim, the way this works again is you have to have multiple screens running. You have one for your simulator. You tell it, oh, yeah, and if you don't have CAN set up, there's a shell script here for sub your virtual CAN. That's the other really nice feature of socket CAN is you don't, I think I already have it set up, you don't really need a CAN to play along. You just need Linux. And they can do virtual CAN buses. So we're just going to say the IC sim's on vCAN 0. All right. Then let's bring up the other one. And so it has the instrument cluster one, and it has the controls. And you're basically just telling them which bus to talk on. And so, all right, so when you see it like idling like that, you know it's connected. And now I have there we go. And this guy works with your keyboard, or I on the plane ride over, I modified it to work with a Sony PlayStation 3 controller. So we'll start that one up. So I like using the controller better. 6 axes. That just means I'm connected. Yeah, I don't have the force feedback stuff totally working yet, but so the way it works is you accelerate just like you would in any kind of game. You can see it move. We also have door lock and unlock, so that all the doors unlock. You can also selectively pick which doors you want to unlock. The way these commands are working is your lock and unlock, you hold down one, you press the other. Or you can hold down whichever one you want and then select one of the buttons. And then whenever you're turning, turn signals work. So if we're looking at, this one will also play background data. So let's do can sniffer. Oh, not that one. On vcan. Okay, so this is closer to what you get in a real vehicle. And so can sniffer, you have a lot more data. So when we are, and one gotcha when you're running multiple apps like this, I mean, it's great from a simulation perspective, but you have to have the one that does controls highlighted. So you just want to work things around. So in this data somewhere, it is what we need to reverse, and we have some challenges. All right, so the first challenge is what we're going to do is we're going to send a CAN packet to unlock exactly 3 doors simultaneously. And I think for time what we'll do is we'll just identify those doors. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change the size of this screen a little bit so it fits a bit better. Let's see if I can make this. And what I'm trying to do here, and it looks like I got it, is trying to get so these CAN IDs stay the same spot, and that's just a formatting thing. It's like Venn information. You'll see that pass through too. And so that's a good example, actually, how to, when you see ISOTP running on CAN, it's just cycling. It's just the continuous packets going through. All right, so let's go back to the controller. This one was door unlocks. So let's see if we can figure out which one does door unlock. So I'm going to cycle through unlocking and locking all the doors and try and figure out which packet it is. And so what we're looking for here is we're looking for 1 byte change whenever I do it. So unlock, lock, unlock, lock, unlock. Which one do you think it is? 88. 164. Let's see here. There you go. Yep. Unlock, unlock. So what we're seeing is we said the F's and the AB. Keep track of time just so I can get through everything. Yeah, we're good. So now, hold on, I lost it. 164, right? I'm missing it. Which one is it again? No, I'm looking at this screen. I can't see it. Oh, there it is. 190. All right. So it's this byte right here, I think. Is that what we saw? Oops. I moved 190. Yeah. So what we have to do, we can use can send to send that packet. Can send. And so when to use can send, really all you gotta do is you send it the signal ID and then your bytes. So what we'll do here, let's see, how am I gonna do this easy? I think I need to pull this down. All right, so we're gonna, we gotta tell it where to send to. vcan 0. All right, nothing moved there, zeros. Okay, so when it's 0, door's unlocked. When it was F, they locked. This method works on real cars as well. Actually, the data you see in the background is actually from my Honda. And so now if we were playing with this, if I just gave it a 1, we saw we unlocked, 3 doors but 1. I'm gonna lock them again, and then let's give it a 3 this time. So you can kind of see how they're just using bits instead of bytes to control which door is actually getting unlocked. And this is pretty common. Sometimes we'll see a whole separate byte used for a trunk, but not always. So something to be aware of when you're testing these. So let's do, and this one is a triggered event. So the one thing with IC simulators is doing all of them. The RPMs is a constant cycle, turning a little bit different, and then the this one is when it happens. So let's do the turn signal, and we're looking for light illumination. Let's bring this guy back up. Is this making sense to everybody so far? The can stuff? Okay, good. So let's see here. We're turning. There we go, thank you. All right, so that is the right turn signal. And so something should be alternating at a pulse of whenever that's going green. I think it's 188. All right, let's switch the other direction. All right, so if you look at 188, you see it blinking at 01. And if I go right, it blinks at 02. So what do you think it would do? Oh, I didn't tell you what the challenge was. The challenge is a way to make it use hazard lights, by the way. So the controller by default won't do hazard lights. And so what do you think it will be for doing hazard lights? Sending at 3? All right. Now the thing is with this, I'm not going to put it in a loop right now, but it's going to have to be in a loop because I think we'll have it flash like once real quick. All right, so if you were to put this in a loop, you'd be able to control the hazard lights. And that's kind of key. So normally when we're in a smaller group and we all had our laptops, we'd all be doing this individually. And so the point here is you'd realize, okay, now I have to make a loop. And you'd probably make it typically at the speed of a typical turn signal. The next one is RPMs. And so the RPMs, the challenge for that guy, or just the hazards, is to make the speedometer like 120 or something. I currently have it set to cap out at 90. That's actually when the force feedback is supposed to kick in, but there's a bug in SCL right now. You can actually make it go wherever you want. But the thing that's more complicated about this particular example is that this can be a little bit harder to find because it's always talking. And you're going to have to beat the speed of it. So let's go ahead and just make sure we can find it. All right, so let's accelerate. See where this guy's at. There we're going up. I'm just going to hold it down for a while. And so the other thing with speed is it's typically 2 bytes and not 1 byte. So look for them kind of going up that way because it's more like a precision thing. Okay, I'm going down in speed. So you see, make sure I'm going down. I'm going to go up in speed. Yeah, I see it. Yep, 244. And so we're not going to go through making a loop just for time, but all you would do is you'd broadcast those 2 with a higher number there. And you want to go faster than the actual cycle counter. So if a 244 is going right there, so is it like a 0.2 milliseconds? So you just want to go faster than 0.2 milliseconds. Or if you're crafty, you'll look for that particular signal and immediately send afterwards. That will prevent from flooding the bus. If you flood the bus too quickly, and just say you don't put a delay in your code and you just blast it, you can shut the engine down. Typically what will happen is the engine will go into limp mode, which is like a 35 mile per hour kind of mode. Oh, which should bring up a point that you shouldn't do this while you're driving. But if you did, that's what would happen, usually. I would never do that playback one. The one I told you is relatively safe to do. That's really when the car's sitting there. If you're driving, you're playing back half your dump, that's a really bad idea. Really, really bad idea. Even in a rental car, bad idea. Okay, let's see here. We can always come back to it if to do the demo. Okay, cool. So the main brains is this ECU unit here. You pay a little more from a junkyard. This guy was built from pulling parts out of a junkyard. It costs around a little over $100 US. This is the one that usually will cost some money, mainly because it's metal and performance tuners like to use it. Pretty much nobody buys the other parts, the security-related parts, the immobilizer, body control module. Nobody buys an instrument cluster. So you can get them really cheap and put one of these together. And so engine control has pretty much just the main brains like I mentioned. It has your VIN numbers, it controls your speed, all that stuff. Other ECUs are typically in module type stuff, like that's a body control module. There's a bunch of different modules, there's a bunch of different sensors. Again, getting anywhere on the wires will get you actually access to stuff. An interesting one is oftentimes going between your body control and your ECU, there's bus lines that will connect those two that are not exposed to the OBD. If you see a line that's not exposed, those are great ones to sniff on. That's typically where the key negotiations happen, that kind of stuff. So to build your own, typically, like I said, go to the junkyard. You're going to just go get the parts. You're going to get wiring diagrams. And a wiring diagram, you're pretty much going to have to pay for, most likely. But they're not too expensive. And there's a couple online sites. I think I typically use one called Mitchell One. And Mitchell One, I'm thinking it's like 17 bucks or something. It's like some kind of subscription thing. But they're basically just generic PDFs that are really easy to save. You're not supposed to, but I'd like to keep them on hand. And so like here is what they kind of look like. So they're different than a schematic if you're looking at normal schematics. They're broken down into their functionality. And once you get used to them, they're pretty nice. So there'll be a whole, like maybe 5 sheets on just your power, and there'll be a bunch on ground. And to get your initial unit up and running, that's the first one you're going to start with. To figure out, there are going to be like 12 volts coming out. Which ones does it plug into for your ECU? Bare minimum, I mean, you can get by. My first test bench was simply just an ECU and the connector. And that's great. I mean, you'll get packets if you're making drivers. It works fine for that. The problem is you don't get a lot of feedback, a lot of control. For this particular guy, I have some extra capabilities in it for demo. And for those, you really have to look at what piece you want to sniff. And so, like, okay, if I want to figure out like the crankshaft position sensor, first what I do is I figure out which wire it is. And in this case, I see that it's pin 27 on C2. It's really hard to read those. I try to make it as visible as possible. That connects to the crankshaft. And then you can basically find out that it's kind of labeled C1, C2, and C3. C2 is in the middle. And then you have to literally like find pin 27. And that's the one you're going to break out. And if you're unfamiliar with some of these, you just really would then go to Wikipedia or somewhere to look up how crankshafts work. And you can, why does it do that? And then I have no idea what's going on with this display right now. But that's an analog one at the top, and this is more of a digital one at the bottom. And it varies as to which one your car is going to use. But they're really similar, or relatively simple, to take an Arduino and simulate these signals. Either analog or digital. It's not a big deal. The speed is just how quickly they go by. So you add a potentiometer. I can't really see it on the screen, but I have one right here. Add a pot to an Arduino that simply controls the delay that is being sent to the crankshaft sensor, and that'll control your RPMs, sometimes speed. The other ones that I have, so this particular unit here is set up that most of the stuff on the display you can control via these different pots. And let's see if we can, I don't remember which one's which. I think okay, so this is fuel. And this one over here, these are just resistance, is all I'm adding. And so if I change the fuel, you can see the dial goes up. Over there. And then we can do temperature, engine temp. Here we go. I'm going to overheat the engine if I can. All right, yeah. So, all right, so now what's happening here is we're sending it directly to the ECU, and then the instrument cluster is just listening on the CAN bus. So it works just like the IC simulator. So if you're familiar with that, we can do that one. Yeah, let's go ahead and let's do that one live. Let's do it live. All right, so that's just normal CAN 0, not virtual CAN 0. All right, so let's do fuel first. And so let's figure out if if I start changing it, since we have just a few on there, we can see right away like a new one popped up. If I mean, I can just leave it for a bit. Where we're at? We're at full tank right now. Let's drop it to no gas. And so it goes down, and there's no gas. So it's 308 with 0. Second byte controls the gas. So what we can do, let's flood that. I believe I have scripts for this one, so it won't be that hard. So it's 308. Doo-ba-doo-ba-doo. How are we going on time? Not too bad. It's under. Yeah, we're not doing shellcode today. Fuel. So let me make sure that this is just really nothing. That's the right one. Yeah, 308, and we're going to give it fuel. All right, so here it's just a shell script. We're just using CAN-SYN, sleeping for 0.1 second. So we'll do that, flood fuel. And it might help if I set the right device. What are we talking about? Oh yeah, so that was a serial line CAN. So those are the three things you pretty much see in socket CAN. You see either CAN, SL CAN, which is serial line, and then VCAN, which is virtual CAN. If you're using a physical device, you either have SL or CAN. And SL just means it's usually a cheaper device that does serial. Like I said, I didn't really have a problem using SL CAN. So I'm flooding it, but I'm not seeing it go up. Did it? Oh, there it goes, yeah. And so what's happening there is because it'll eventually get the right speed or the right fuel. And so if you want to override it, it again would be better to listen and then just send. We're just using a basic shell script, and we're controlling it on the vehicle. But we're using the exact same method that we would use on ICSIM. It works on the real car. ICSIM actually can broadcast to a CAN. I wouldn't recommend it. But that's always been there for the point that if we want to do some modifications, we can then control an actual car with a game controller. I just haven't quite done that part yet. But it'll most likely happen. So, Oh, and so building these test benches, again, it's nice to have them to work on by your desk as opposed to going down to your garage or wherever. But you can also tell how quickly it is to identify these packets compared to an ICSIM when you had all the real CAN data flying by as well. One method to do it on a real car to kind of eliminate some of those pull fuses for some of the devices you don't care about. Just look at what fuses control what, disconnect them from your car. That'll eliminate some of the noise. It's a similar setup as a test bench, but test bench can go really, really quick. If there's certain signals you want to know for whatever the reason is, you can basically just look at the wiring diagram for what wire it is, simulate that signal, and check the CAN. And then you'll have it, and it'll work on a full-blown car. And it takes very little amount of time. So let's go back to this guy. How did I do this? Ah, I see. So open garages, like I mentioned before, is just a group that really anybody can set up. If you're lucky enough to have one in your area, then just join one. We have a little Twitter account, and when I did this in Cincinnati, Ohio, it was a lot of performance tuners and mechanics. I recently moved to Seattle, and in there it's a lot of Burning Man people. So it's a different group of people, different ideas. I haven't really been in a group that did primarily security, but it really just depends on you. And so whatever you feel like doing, you should just go and start your own. They don't, again, cost anything. I recommend, I'm going to release it probably in an hour or two. There's a character sheet kind of design I've been playing with where you can basically fill out what you want your open garage to be, what kind of stuff you have there. If there is parking available, that kind of stuff. When we did this in Cincinnati, we didn't have a bay. So you don't think you have to have like an actual mechanic shop to work on these. You really just want to set a time once a month is typically what I do, where you get together, you talk about what you're working on, and then either pair up with people or you just have a reason to kind of have an update in a month. It kind of gives you that incentive to keep working on things on the side. It was really, really helpful when it came to finding other people. Building this test bench, from the first time I built one, I was working with a mechanic. He's like, yeah, no problem. Like we can slap that together. No, no worries at all. And I'm used to looking at schematics. When I first looked at a wiring diagram, it didn't look like it made any sense to me. It's just this booklet of everything scattered everywhere, because it's like, it made sense later, like, okay, well, if you're working on your nav unit, here's only the wires you care about. But I'm used to seeing it as a blown out completely, and if you blow out a car completely, it's impossible to read. So, it really helped to go through that, and really helped the learning curve. So I recommend it. I've seen it also where people have done an open garage where they met mainly online. Whatever works for you. It doesn't really matter. You're just making an area, and you can have a topic specific for your stuff. If you only work on Mercedes or motorcycles, it's fine too. But it's a good idea to create one. Do we have time for this? I hope we do. We do. Okay, cool. So, CAN packets. We learned how to basically figure out what does what. So what controls the fuel, what controls whatever piece you're looking at, and that's great and all. But technically that's not a big deal. I mean, obviously whoever made the vehicle knows exactly what those are. So don't do the mistake of, oh, I figured out how to control your brakes by sending the message that controls brakes, because that packet's supposed to control the brakes. That's what it does. If you were to contact an OEM and said, yeah, this packet controls your brakes, they know what it controls. They'll sell you that information if you want. It's $25,000, but they'll sell it to you. Dealerships will buy it. One of the main problems with that type of stuff is, if you go back to troubleshooting for like a mom and pop mechanic, mechanics would really like to have that information too, because when you query it and it says, oh, your power window is working fine, but obviously it's not, you would really like to know at that stage, what's the packet that's sending it? Is it a clunky CAN device on the sensor side? And if you can see that the CAN packet is being sent that controls the window, and it's not going down, you can quickly identify that it's CAN. But because it's 25 grand per make and model, and if you work on more than one make and model, you're not going to be able to afford that. So mechanics need to reverse engineer the stuff. They need to have that information as well. The current workaround that I've seen is that people will take stuff from Alibaba, some cheaper devices where they've reverse engineered some of that information, and then you can kind of go through the tools that way. So from a security perspective, what you need to do is, this is only one piece that you would then weaponize. So if you wanted to control the brakes or control the steering, knowing how to do it, that's your first step, but you haven't done anything yet. You're going to need to next find an exploit. And so the exploits will typically be, well, I guess the sexier ones are wireless. And so you're going to go after the telecomatics, or you're going to go after the infotainment unit most of the time. It could be OnStar or whatever. But that's where you're going to find your stuff, and then you're going to put it into a packet payload. We're probably not going to have time in this class to go over shellcode for them, but that's the thing. That's your payload now. So instead of running bin shell or whatever, you're going to open up whatever their driver device is, and you're going to write those bytes to it. And you're going to probably put it into a loop. That's the main key. Now, as this is progressing, we're starting to get to a point where there's at least discussion on monitoring the bus, getting normal, kind of like a baseline for what your car is normally talking at. So when something malicious gets on your vehicle and tries to do something, maybe you can identify it. Maybe you can see that, oh, this is different than normal, and you can have a red flag or whatever. So I'll show you a tool I wrote. It's going to be, I guess we're releasing it here at Troopers. And it will let you identify the type of car you're on without sending any packets to it. So therefore, because the thing is, you don't want to, because these parts are used in a bunch of different vehicles. I mean, that ECU is used in a ton of GMs. That Honda navigation system I had was also used in a bunch of pickup trucks. Sending the packet that you think is going to control brakes may not do it in the other vehicles. So you really want to get a baseline. And one method, of course, is to query the VIN number, which we could do, and then determine if we're on the right vehicle that way. But now you generate packets. Your infotainment unit is not going to ask for the VIN number. So you want to do it passively. So I wrote a tool called COF. I don't think I have an extra slide just for it, but I can show it to you. So COF is on GitHub. It's also, if you do Ruby, you can just do a gem install for COF. And this is a passive fingerprinting tool. It's called Can of Fingers. Little known fact is, way before POF was written, which is the passive fingerprinting tool for networking, I did the proof of concept for that one. So it kind of made sense that I would do it for CAN. And so I did. So what happens here is it will do, we're going to set it up, we'll do it on, Actually, I think it looks a little better on this sample file I have. So let's do, so let's look at the help. So it has some capabilities of, you can give it a log file, you can give it a live bus, and it will analyze all the different CAN packets that are on there. So this tool is not the part you're going to have in your exploit. This is what you'd use before you exploit your vehicle, the one you're targeting. And so this is going to take a sample of what's going on, how often you see certain things, what are the signals for that vehicle, is there any padding, that kind of stuff. And so for this example, we're going to give it a log file. And then I think I have one in test for the Honda. 2000 dump. Okay. And then I'm going to also add print status, because it kind of shows you why it makes decisions. Did I do something wrong? Oh, log file doesn't have a dash in it. And what else? Oh, yes. Thank you. All right, so it's just going to analyze the packets. And then, so typically your output is simply just this JSON right here. And I didn't give it a fingerprint database. If I did, it can then identify the make, model, and year if I already knew it, and the trim. But typically this is just a generic one. So if you were targeting a vehicle, you know this vehicle is the one you want to look at. Here is your common IDs. And then your main ID is 17C, and this is your main interval. And it kind of determines that by looking at your packet payload count here, and then your arbitration ID. And so you can kind of just by glancing at this kind of see that, okay, well, this is a common one, is a 978 with this amount of sample size we had. Probably the next one is here. And this is really, really unique, this fingerprint. So what you would do in your exploit code is you would, before you broadcast anything, you would basically just sniff. I would probably just go with this main ID one here. And you would just listen for an arbitration ID of 17C, and you'd only have to listen for this long. If you don't see it in this amount of time, you're on the wrong vehicle. Just exit out, don't do anything. Or you can listen for another one if you have more than one payload. And so this is a really handy way of secretly and silently jumping on things. This also has a kind of an extra feature in this tool, and it is, where is it at here? It's this pattern thing. So not terribly well documented, sadly, but it basically has this one pattern thing right now where you can give it any kind of pattern. It's currently only takes, I think the character is B, and B, it'll be a lowercase or capital B, and it's going to represent an on or an off. And like you can give it a pattern of say like on, off, on, off, on, off. And then have it listen to a live bus. And then like say if you're trying to reverse engineer like door unlocks, you would just follow that pattern. Lock, unlock, lock, unlock, lock, 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 unlock. Quit it and it'll go, oh, here's your code. And here's at this byte offset. It finds it for you. The ideal is to keep working on that one and do ramping. That's the other thing you can do. So that's probably going to be a greater than, less than symbol. But when you're doing like speed, those are ramping values. Those are going up on a certain curve. They're not bit changes. And so they'll have a couple patterns in there that'll just make your life a lot easier, so you don't have to cut things in half and rebroadcast them. It can analyze lots of data at a single time in real time. And so Can of Fingers is a free tool. You can just do a gem install to get it, include it in your other projects if you want. And that will help you with your exploitation. So we'll do some questions. Any questions so far? Yeah. Yeah.
Just this bus technology, or does it apply to every car vendor, European, Asian, US?
All right, so the question is, does the bus protocols apply to all vehicles?
Yeah.
Yes. So all vehicles have buses. Now they're going to be different types. So they're not always, they always will have CAN. They'll always have that, at least the ability to query that OBD. That's a standard. They may not use it for all their communication, but they'll definitely have it for like just those queries. They'll use other lines like K-line, KWP, some of the other ones maybe for doing some of their other communication. There's still things you can look up and figure out sniff them, work them the same way you would work with CAN, but that's going to vary from year and model. But CAN will exist there. OBD packets will exist on anything pretty much above the year 2000. There is some proprietary modes and PIDs for certain makes and manufacturers, and you can either get those maybe through brute forcing. I don't know how well that would work for you. Typically the method of that is to get a tool, a dealership tool, and just use, I have one here, a Y connector, which is still in this packaging, but it basically plugs into that and has, splits off into two pigtails, and then you put a sniffer on one end, you plug their tool in the other, record.
So again, just to get more precise, the CAN specifications apply to every vendor worldwide.
Yes, CAN is in all the vehicles.
I know there are just a few vendors for the electronic.
Yes, and they all share their parts. So their parts are shared across a bunch of both vendors and whatnot too. So when again, that's another reason why you want to detect what vehicle you're running on. Because it's also kind of hard to figure that out. When I did my exploit for the infotainment stuff, I didn't know that at the time. And so I was like, oh, this is all for Honda and blah, blah, and I found out it's not. And then I didn't know how to even tell what all of this in,
There's a difference because certain vendors concentrate in certain areas. Like Audi is into this remote thing. So this is the reason why it varies by the vendors. With the infotainment system, they put research on it.
Yeah, there's a whole company.
Yeah,
There's like only a couple really, that like Green River and stuff that make them for just about anybody, and they're just reused. And they'll sell different types of them. Like the one I had obviously was on K-line, so if your vehicle doesn't use K-line, you wouldn't necessarily have that one, but sometimes it's just a jumper setting. They can actually use other ones. It's just that's how that particular one is.
Thank you very much. It's fun.
All right, thanks. Other questions?
Then I'll ask a question.
Okay.
Someone I know created this 5-star improvement program for automotive security.
Yes.
Evidence capture in the demonstration you just did, now that you talked about weaponization, what kind of evidence capture would be present in this case if someone was to be able to exploit your steering column or brakes in motion?
For what I've seen, just about none. That's one of the big reasons the Calvary exists right now, is kind of bring out from a security perspective some of the shortcomings for things, and there's varying reasons for different stuff. From a security perspective, we see things like CAN, and we go, oh my God, that's the worst design ever. But it really isn't for what the point of it is. It's really to get messages there very quickly. It's very fault tolerant on environmental issues. That's why you have the two wires that separate their voltage. So with the Calvary group, that's one of the key parts of the 5 stars, that we need better methods of not only detecting when things happen on your bus, but also what is a good state. What is the infotainment units supposed to be at? What the DLL is supposed to look like? Is there any way to tell that something has been modified? And currently, there really isn't. Your airbag controller has some stuff, but that's again, it's more about crash data. It's more for insurance companies. So, yeah, I'd have to say, like, if you were to do one of these exploits, you'd probably get away just fine.
But depending on your car make and model, there is quite a lot of information being stored. There are lots of controllers, there are lots of buses. We use at least 8 CAN buses in our biggest cars, and FlexRay as well. And we store a lot of data in the controllers, and you need that for accident analysis, you need that for insurance stuff, and so there's pretty much.
So you think you'd find the packet? Now, if that's the case, where would you? Yeah, keep the mic.
I don't know exactly if you could find the package, but you could probably figure out what went wrong. So you might see that certain data was not as it was supposed to be.
Yeah, like brakes just fired.
Engineers will find contradictions, and usually with new models, when they're out, if there's accidents happening, you fly out a team that analyzes the accident and analyzes the vehicle. So we get into that. I mean, there is reverse engineering being done, because that's our due diligence when we put out new cars on the road to figure out what went wrong. So there is some stuff being done. I agree with you totally that, I mean, this is just the beginning, but vehicle makers, OEMs do quite a bit for safety reasons.
Yes.
Not security, but safety.
Yeah.
Because we're liable to that.
And I found from doing these types of talks and with the cavalry that almost every LEM I've talked to has been really responsive. They're actually really for working on security. They're not, at least my exposure, has not been the type like, oh, it's not an issue or nothing. It's just typically they're not as open to just like independent researchers as, say, like Microsoft or a software vendor that. But they definitely are working on things. It's just they tend to work in their own silos on stuff. And like you had mentioned, there's data on there. Now that data is most likely proprietary. How to query is proprietary. An independent researcher isn't going to be able to just tell. You definitely can't do it at home. There's not like a scan tool that you can go buy at your car dealership repair place and just verify that everything's cool. And that'd be great, if we can get to that point. Where at least we can, at some level, just check our own vehicles, determine what their state is. So hopefully we'll get there. But again, I think it's, like I said, almost everything's safety right now, and that's great. It's just, I'd like to see a little more security tied into it. Oh, your question.
Yeah, I really liked your demos. Are you aware of any research for attacks against CAN which do not require the plug to plug in order to inject data? Maybe crossing from the IVI, which can be attacked wirelessly, into the CAN, or doing some sort of electronic induction in the system?
Yeah, so there is a decent amount of research on that. I'm aware of several cases where you can do things wirelessly and remotely on the CAN through exploits. My personal research has always been on contract for that. So it's under NDA, and I think a lot of people's is that way. The only ones I can think of that are public, I think University of Washington had some stuff where they talk about, I don't know if they went into a whole lot of detail, but they did mention that it has been done as well. But yeah, I can definitely say that you can do that. Yeah, I think that's all I can say. But yeah, you don't need the dongle. Like if I do a demo like on TV, I'll always use one because the point isn't that car. Like I don't ever want somebody to say like, oh, he's on a Toyota Prius and that's what he's attacking. Therefore, there's a problem with Prius. I'm always trying to just do awareness kind of stuff. I won't do the fear stuff. So I always throw a dongle in my picture regardless because I want somebody to have that out. Like, oh, he put some weird device on the car. That's what caused the problem. And usually for my demos, that is what's causing the problem. It's a universal way of doing it because that dongle will always work, as long as I know what packet to send. And so, like, yeah, I will use them for my stuff, but yeah, you don't need them. And when I do on contract, I don't obviously use a dongle for contract work. Any more questions? This one? Oh.
Again, the car bus, the core car engine functions, there might be a difference in the use of the bytes for sports car settings or if you do chip tuning. Is that right? Yeah, sports cars are like way different than cars. They have a lot of they have CAN stuff, but there's going to be a lot more of them. And for this type of research, you're probably going to want to get a higher end sniffer, one that can do multiple buses at a time. I typically show cheap stuff just so people can get started. Yeah. You're going to want something way better. Sorry, again, that means they use the range of these 8 bytes, or do they use additional buses?
It's still the stuff I've seen. It's just been lots of CAN buses. Now, I haven't worked on a whole lot of racing vehicles.
Yeah, I don't talk about
my area.
I don't talk about racing vehicles like Formula 1 or NASCAR, whatever. Just sports cars you can buy, like a Mustang or whatever.
Yeah, no, they use normal stuff. I'm talking about the ones that actually race. Because
Ferrari or whatever, so just affordable sports cars.
Yeah, it may not be, like I said, like they'll probably have CAN, but they are most likely not using it for their normal communication. They're using another protocol. But it'd be one you'd be able to get to.
Yep. Thank you.
Just won't be necessarily CAN. It'll be something else. And it's just an engineering decision, so it could be. One time. Any other questions? All right, yeah, I don't think we're going to do the super text card demo. So if you want, that's also on GitHub. I have another game where it's a modified Mario Kart, and as Mario Kart drives around the course, it spits out CAN packets for its controls. And so that's that. We use this in captured a flag at H3 in Atlanta, and so all the flags were based on what shoots mushrooms and what accelerates and whatnot. And so one person would grab a game controller and drive around with their other teammate would have to figure out the packets and turn those in for flags. So that's also available on my GitHub request if you want to play that one too. It's much easier than ICSim because it doesn't broadcast any other data. You can't really see it up there, but it's just the packets being used by the game controller. Turn to can. Yep, I think that's it. Thank you guys.